You're listening to the Harmony of We, a space for remembering what we already are together. I'm Greg Kuiper, counselor, author, and fellow traveler in this ongoing field of being human. This podcast isn't about fixing. It's not about getting relationships right. It's about coming into resonance with yourself, with each other, and with the presence that lives in between. This is where the book relationship, the harmony of we, continues in breath, in story, and in shared awareness. Hello and welcome back to this week's episode of Harmony of We, episode 23, What We Choose to Remember. Last week, we spent some time reflecting on what it means to be truly seen, not simply heard or understood in the sense that someone can repeat back our words, but seen in the deeper sense of knowing that another person has welcomed our experience without trying to rush it somewhere else. It's a remarkable gift, one that quietly changes the atmosphere of a relationship. When we feel seen, something inside us softens. We become a little less guarded and a little more willing to bring our whole selves into the room. Today, I'd like to continue that journey, but from a different direction. I'd like to talk about memory. Not the kind of memory that helps us remember where we left our keys, but the kind that quickly and quietly shapes the way we see the people we love. Because every relationship is, in many ways, a collection of remembered moments. Some memories make us smile before we've even realized we're smiling. Others still ache. Some become stories we tell over dinner with friends, and others become stories we tell only to ourselves. And over time, something subtle begins to happen. We begin living inside the stories we've chosen to remember. Let's check in with Ethan and Maya. Saturday mornings, our couple had developed their own rhythm. The week moved quickly enough that Saturdays felt less like another day on the calendar and more like an invitation to breathe. Ethan stood in the hallway with the closet doors open. Camping gear was scattered across the floor. Sleeping bag that hadn't been used in years. A lantern with weak batteries. An old backpack with a broken zipper. Maya walked by carrying a mug of coffee. "I thought you were organizing." "I am," she laughed. "Looks more like you're relocating everything." "I'm getting there." She smiled and continued toward the kitchen. A few moments later, Ethan reached toward the back of the top shelf and pulled down a dusty shoebox. It wasn't labeled neatly, just one word written in black marker across the lid. Us. He frowned thoughtfully. "Maya?" She returned. "What did you find?" She looked at the box and immediately smiled. "Oh, my goodness. I completely forgot about that." "You know what's in it?" "I think so." She sat down on the floor before he had even removed the lid. When he lifted it open, both of them laughed softly. Ticket stubs, postcards, photographs, a folded map from a road trip they'd taken years earlier, restaurant receipts, birthday cards, tiny reminders of ordinary days that had somehow become worth keeping. Ethan picked up an old movie ticket. "I can't even remember what we saw." Maya leaned closer. "I can." "You can?" "It was terrible." He laughed. "Then why did we save the tickets?" She shrugged. "Because we laughed through most of the movie." He smiled. "I forgot that." "No," she said gently. "I think you just remembered something else first." So let's stay here for just a moment with them. Memory has an interesting way of working. We often think we're remembering events, but what we usually remember is the meaning those events carried. A ticket stub isn't valuable because of the paper, it's valuable because it opens a doorway. A photograph doesn't simply capture a moment, it invites us back into who we were when that moment happened. Relationships are filled with these quiet doorways. The question is whether we ever stop long enough to walk back through them. So the camping gear was forgotten. For nearly an hour, they sat cross legged on the living room floor, one memory leading naturally to another. Maya held up a faded receipt from a small coffee shop. I know exactly where this was. Ethan studied it. Oh, the little place near the river. She nodded. It was raining. You were nervous. I was terrified. She laughed. I remember. You didn't know I was about to ask your dad if I could marry you. You looked distracted. I was trying to remember the speech I'd practiced. She smiled. You never gave the speech. I know. What happened? He looked at her. You smiled, and I forgot every word. They both laughed. I've never told you that. No, you haven't. A few minutes later, Maya found an old postcard. On the front was a watercolor painting of a bookstore overlooking the ocean. She turned it over, her own handwriting on the back. Someday, Ethan smiled. I remember this. I wanted to own a bookstore. You did. She looked thoughtfully at the card. I haven't thought about that dream in years. He asked quietly, do you miss it? She considered the question longer than he expected. I don't know. I think I miss who I was when I imagined it. He nodded. I understand that. She looked at him. I don't think I've ever asked if you miss parts of who you used to be. He smiled. I think we all do. Then he paused. But maybe growing older isn't about becoming someone completely different. Maybe it's about carrying those earlier versions of ourselves with kindness. One of the quiet gifts of a long relationship is that someone remembers versions of you that you may have forgotten. They remember the dreams you once carried, the fears you rarely spoke aloud, and the hopes that seemed obvious then but became buried beneath mortgages and careers, schedules, responsibilities, kids. Sometimes the people who know us best don't remind us who we've become. They remind us who we've always been. Near the bottom of the box sat a sealed envelope, yellowed around the edges. Maya stared at it. No. Ethan looked over at her. What? She carefully picked it up. I wondered where this went. He recognized it immediately. My letter. The one you wrote before the wedding. He smiled. I haven't seen that in years. She opened it carefully. The paper crackled softly. For a few moments, she just simply read quietly. Ethan watched her expression change. She smiled, laughed once, then she became still. What? She looked up. I forgot this part. She handed him the letter. He read aloud. I don't know everything that life will ask of us. I'm sure there will be seasons when we're tired, moments when we misunderstand each other, days when love feels effortless, and days when it feels like a choice. If those days come, I hope we remember that we promise to keep choosing each other. Not because we'll never struggle, but because you're worth returning to. He stopped reading, then laughed softly. I was more thoughtful than I realized. You were hopeful. I was. She reached for his hand. You know what surprises me? What? You were promising we'd avoid difficult situations. You weren't doing that. No. You were promising we'd stay. He looked around the room. I think we've actually done that. Not perfectly. No, but faithfully. She squeezed his hand. I think that's enough. John Gottman has spent decades studying relationships, and one of the insights that has emerged from his work is the importance of what he calls a positive perspective within a relationship. When couples have built a reservoir of trust, affection, and shared goodwill, they're more likely to interpret one another's actions generously, even during difficult moments. That doesn't mean they ignore hurt. It means hurt isn't the only story they remember. Perhaps that's one of love's quiet practices. Not pretending everything has been wonderful, but refusing to let disappointment become the entire narrative. Later that afternoon, they decided to take a walk through the neighborhood. The air had begun to cool, and children were riding bicycles along the sidewalks while neighbors watered flowers and chatted across driveways. As they passed the little park a few blocks from their house, Ethan noticed an older couple sitting on a bench. They weren't talking. One of them held a newspaper. The other watched a group of children playing. Yet there was something peaceful about the silence between them. Maya noticed them too. They looked comfortable. Ethan smiled. That's the word, comfortable. They kept walking. After a while, Ethan said quietly, I used to think healthy relationships were the ones where people never changed. Maya looked over. And now? I think they're the ones where people keep learning who the other person is becoming. She nodded. That feels truer. He looked ahead. I wonder how many versions of us we've already loved. She laughed softly. Quite a few. The newlyweds, the exhausted young parents, the ones trying to figure out careers, the ones learning how to repair after disagreements, the ones sitting on the living room floor this morning. She smiled. And probably people we haven't met yet. He looked at her with quiet affection. I'm looking forward to meeting them. Perhaps that's another way of understanding commitment, not as a promise to remain exactly the same, but as a willingness to keep discovering each other. Every season introduces something slightly new. The question isn't whether change will happen, it always does. The invitation is whether we'll remain curious enough to notice. When they arrived home, the shoebox still sat on the coffee table. Maya picked up a blank index card from a nearby drawer. What are you doing? She smiled. Starting something. She wrote slowly, then placed the card inside the box. Ethan looked over her shoulder and read, Saturday morning, we found our story again, not because we'd forgotten it, because life had become busy enough that we'd stopped revisiting it. Today reminded us that love isn't only built by creating new memories. Sometimes it's strengthened by remembering the beautiful ones we've already been given. She dated it, closed the lid, set the box gently back on the shelf. Ethan wrapped an arm around her shoulders. So, this box isn't finished. She smiled. I hope it never is. As relationships grow, they naturally collect memories. Some are joyful and some are painful. Most are wonderfully ordinary. The challenge isn't deciding which memories exist, they all do. The challenge is noticing which ones we've allowed to become the loudest voices in our hearts. What if every now and then we intentionally return to the moments that reminded us why we chose each other in the first place? Not to deny the difficult chapters, but to remember they were never the whole story. Perhaps love matures not because life becomes easier, but because we learn to hold the entire story with gratitude. The laughter and the tears, the certainty and the questions, the beginnings and the becoming. And somewhere in that remembering, we discover that the relationship we have today has been quietly shaped by countless ordinary moments we almost forgot. This week, find one small reminder of a shared memory, a photograph tucked into a drawer, a handwritten note, a favorite place, or even a song that takes you back. Pause with it for a moment. Notice not only what happened, but what that memory reveals about who you were becoming together. Sometimes remembering isn't about living in the past. It's about rediscovering the quiet hope that still lives within your story. See you next time.